Welcome back to PsyberSpace, the podcast where we dive deep into psychology, culture, media, and technology. I'm your host, Leslie Poston, strategist and research psychologist. Today, we're unpacking a fascinating psychological concept we've talked briefly about on other episodes that affects all of us in our daily lives: cognitive dissonance. This is the mental discomfort we experience when holding two or more conflicting beliefs, values, or attitudes. It's a phenomenon that not only influences our personal decision-making, but also permeates our social interactions, political opinions, and cultural practices. Let's dig right in. First, let's start by understanding what cognitive dissonance really is. The term was first coined by psychologist Leon Festinger back in the 1950s. Festinger observed a doomsday cult and noticed something fascinating. When the cult's prophecy failed to come true, instead of admitting they were wrong, many members doubled down on their beliefs. This observation led Festinger to develop his theory of cognitive dissonance. The core idea is that when we encounter information that conflicts with our existing beliefs or behaviors, we experience psychological discomfort. To alleviate this discomfort, we often change our beliefs or rationalize our behaviors. For example, let's say you believe in being environmentally friendly, but you drive a gas-guzzling SUV. This conflict might create cognitive dissonance. To reduce this discomfort, you might justify your choice by emphasizing the car's safety features or its necessity due to your large family or frequent outdoor activities. Dr. Joel Cooper has extensively studied the self-justification aspect of cognitive dissonance. His work shows how this phenomenon influences everything from our smallest choices to our major moral decisions. In one study, Cooper and his colleagues found that when people make difficult decisions, they tend to enhance the attractiveness of the chosen alternative and devalue the rejected option. This is a prime example of how we adjust our attitudes to align with our actions, reducing the dissonance we feel, rather than changing our actions. Understanding cognitive dissonance is important because it helps explain why we sometimes act in ways that seem irrational or contradictory. It's not just making excuses. It's a fundamental psychological mechanism that helps us maintain a coherent sense of self in a complex world. Today we're going to look at ways this mechanism shows up in our daily lives everywhere, from diet to politics. Let's dive into a topic that's particularly relevant in our modern society: how cognitive dissonance manifests in public discussions around health and body image. This is an area where personal choices, societal pressures, and scientific understanding often collide, creating a perfect storm for cognitive dissonance. It's important to first recognize that our discussions about health, particularly when it comes to weight and body image, are deeply influenced by societal norms and biases. Research into fat phobia and anti-fat bias reveals a pervasive influence on both personal and public discourse related to health and body image. Dr. Rebecca Puhl and Dr. Chelsea Hewer, in their comprehensive review, The Stigma of Obesity, a Review and Update, highlight how societal standards impose often unrealistic ideals. These ideals can lead individuals to experience significant cognitive dissonance between their body image and society's expectations. This dissonance can manifest in various ways. Some people might engage in harmful behaviors such as disordered eating or excessive exercise in an attempt to conform to these societal ideals. Others might project their own health standards or their own health insecurities onto others, sometimes in the form of unsolicited advice, talking about your gym habits next to a fat person in some public setting, or judgments based on someone's appearance, whether it's too fat or too thin. What's particularly interesting is how this dissonance plays out in healthcare settings. A study by Dr. Sean Phelan and colleagues found that healthcare providers' biases against overweight patients can lead to disparities in treatment. These biases not only affect the quality of care, but also perpetuate a cycle of shame and inadequate health management, and can sometimes discourage people from seeing their doctor altogether for fear they will be gaslit or have their real health issues ignored. So, how do we address this complex issue? One approach is to advocate for a more inclusive understanding of health that moves beyond weight. Dr. Linda Bacon's research, presented in her book Health at Every Size, suggests that focusing on weight as the primary indicator of health can be counterproductive. Instead, a holistic approach that considers epigenetics as well as emotional, psychological, and physical well-being offers better care. This perspective helps mitigate the internal conflicts individuals face and fosters a more supportive environment for making genuinely healthy choices, free from societal judgment. It's about recognizing that health is multifaceted and that our worth isn't determined by a number on a scale. As we navigate these discussions, it's important to be mindful of our own biases and the cognitive dissonance we might experience. Are we judging others based on appearance? Are we making assumptions about health based on body size? By questioning these instincts, we can work towards a more compassionate and scientifically grounded approach to health and body image. Let's shift gears and talk about another area where cognitive dissonance plays a significant role: our relationship with the environment. Many of us express a strong desire to help the environment, yet our actions don't always align with these values. This gap between our pro-environmental attitudes and our actual behaviors is often referred to as the green gap. Dr. Caitlin Ramey from the University of Michigan has done fascinating work in this area. In a 2019 study, Ramey and her colleagues explored why people who claim to care about the environment don't always act in environmentally friendly ways. They found that one key factor is the perception of personal impact. Many people believe their individual actions won't make a significant difference, leading to a kind of environmental learned helplessness. This dissonance between our beliefs and our actions can be uncomfortable, and that's where phenomena like greenwashing comes into play. Companies often capitalize on our desire to feel environmentally responsible by promoting green initiatives, which are sometimes exaggerated or misleading. This allows consumers to feel less dissonance about their purchasing decisions, even if the actual environmental impact is minimal. Dr. Beth Carlin, founder of the Sea Change Institute, has conducted extensive research on the efficacy of energy conservation campaigns. Her work suggests that providing clear, actionable steps can help reduce the gap between environmental concern and behavior. It's not just about raising awareness, it's about empowering people to take meaningful action. So, how can we address this dissonance in our own lives? One approach is to focus on small, achievable changes. Dr. Susan Clayton, an environmental psychologist from the College of Worcester, suggests in her research that starting with manageable actions can build a sense of environmental efficacy, making those larger changes seem more feasible over time. Another strategy is to make environmentally friendly choices more visible and socially reinforced. For example, a study by Dr. Robert Cialdini found that people are more likely to engage in pro-environmental behaviors when they believe others in their community are doing the same. As we confront the realities of climate change, as we discussed in a previous episode, bridging this gap between our environmental values and actions becomes increasingly critical. It's about recognizing our cognitive dissonance, understanding its roots, and finding ways to align our behaviors more closely with our beliefs. Every small action counts, and by addressing our own dissonance, we can contribute to a larger cultural shift toward sustainability. Now let's get into a topic that's particularly relevant in today's polarized political climate: how cognitive dissonance influences our political allegiances and our voting behavior. This is an area where we often see people supporting policies or candidates that seem to contradict their personal interests, their stated values, or even their actions. Dr. Diana Mutz, a political scientist at the University of Pennsylvania, has conducted research in this area. In her book, Hearing the Other Side: Deliberative versus Participatory Democracy, Mutz presents findings that challenge our intuitions about political discourse. Contrary to the common belief that exposure to opposing viewpoints encourages understanding, Mutz found that it can actually increase political polarization in some cases. This counterintuitive finding speaks to the power of cognitive dissonance in shaping our political views. When confronted with information that challenges our political beliefs, we often double down on our existing positions rather than change our minds. This is a classic example of how we attempt to reduce cognitive dissonance by reinforcing our existing beliefs rather than accommodating new information. Dr. Leonie Huddy, a political psychologist at Stony Brook University, has shown in her research how emotional attachment to political parties can override inconsistencies between a party's platform and an individual's personal interests. Her work demonstrates how party identification becomes a part of one's social identity, making it resistant to change even in the face of contradictory information. Let's consider a current example to illustrate this point. In the upcoming 2024 U.S. presidential election, 3 weeks away from the time of recording of this episode, we're seeing a complex political landscape that's ripe for cognitive dissonance. Vice President Kamala Harris is running as a Democrat. Dr. Jill Stein is running as a Green Party candidate, and former President Donald Trump is running as a Republican. Each of these candidates presents potential sources of cognitive dissonance for their supporters. For instance, Democratic voters who are dissatisfied with certain policies in the Middle East but still feel loyal to the Democratic Party might experience severe dissonance. Similarly, supporters of third-party candidates like Dr. Stein might grapple with their desire for change versus the practical implications of voting outside the two-party system with an electoral college still in place. What's particularly interesting is how these conflicting feelings manifest in voter behavior. We often see voters rationalizing their support for candidates who may have taken stances contradicting that voter's own stated beliefs. This is cognitive dissonance in action, the mind working hard to reconcile conflicting attitudes and behaviors. Dr. Drew Weston, a psychologist at Emory University, conducted a neuroimaging study that shed light on this phenomenon. Weston found that when people were presented with negative information about their preferred political candidates, the parts of their brains associated with emotion and conflict resolution lit up, while areas of the brain associated with rational thinking showed decreased activity. This suggested that our political allegiances are often more emotional than rational, which can lead to cognitive dissonance when faced with conflicting information. Understanding these mechanisms can help us become more aware of our own biases and the ways we might be rationalizing political positions. It's not about dismissing our beliefs, but rather about cultivating a more nuanced understanding of political issues and being open to reevaluating our positions in light of new information. As we navigate this complex political landscape, we must remember that cognitive dissonance is a normal part of human psychology. The goal isn't to eliminate it entirely, but to recognize when it's influencing our thinking and our decision-making. By doing so, we can strive for more informed and thoughtful political engagement, fostering a much-needed healthier democratic process. Why don't we turn our attention to an area where cognitive dissonance plays a significant but often overlooked role, our interpersonal relationships. Whether it's romantic partnerships, friendships, or family dynamics, cognitive dissonance can profoundly influence how we perceive and interact with those closest to us. Dr. Elliot Aronson, a pioneer in the field of social psychology, has conducted extensive research on self-perception theory and its relation to cognitive dissonance in relationships. His work illustrates how people often alter their perceptions of their partners to align with their desire for a stable relationship. For instance, imagine someone in a relationship that doesn't fully meet their emotional needs. Rather than acknowledging this discrepancy, they might rationalize their partner's behavior or downplay the importance of certain qualities that they once valued. This is cognitive dissonance at work, the mind trying to reconcile the gap between expectation and reality. Dr. Sandra Murray has studied this phenomenon. Murray and her colleagues found that people in committed relationships often idealize their partners, seeing them as more virtuous than they really are. This idealization can serve as a buffer against doubts and disappointments, reducing cognitive dissonance and helping to maintain relationship satisfaction. However, this tendency can sometimes lead to staying in unfulfilling or even harmful relationships. Dr. Zemina Arriaga's research explores how cognitive dissonance can contribute to the persistence of abusive relationships. Victims might minimize the abuse or even blame themselves to reduce the discomfort of acknowledging the full reality of their situation. Social expectations and cultural norms add another layer of complexity to relationship-related cognitive dissonance. In today's digital age, the pressure to present a perfect relationship image on social media can lead individuals to overlook real issues or rationalize unhappiness. Dr. Catalina Toma from the University of Wisconsin-Madison has studied this phenomenon, finding that the act of presenting an idealized relationship online can actually increase commitment to the relationship, even if it's not entirely satisfying offline. So, how can we navigate cognitive dissonance in our relationships more effectively? Dr. John Gottman, renowned for his work on marital stability, suggests in his book, The 7 Principles for Making Marriage Work, that acknowledging and discussing discrepancies between expectations and reality is critical for relationship health. This approach doesn't eliminate cognitive dissonance, but it allows couples to address it openly and constructively. For those struggling with significant relationship dissonance, professional help can be invaluable. Therapists and counselors often work with clients to recognize and address dissonance in the relationship, promoting healthier dynamics and genuine fulfillment. Dr. Susan Johnson's emotionally focused therapy, for example, can help some couples identify and work through the emotional patterns that underlie their conflicts, often addressing the root causes of cognitive dissonance in the process. Understanding cognitive dissonance in our relationships doesn't mean we should become overly cynical or distrustful. Instead, it's about developing a more nuanced and realistic view of our relationships. By recognizing when we're engaging in rationalization or idealization, we can make more conscious choices about our relationships and work towards genuine connection and satisfaction. Let's look at how cognitive dissonance manifests in a setting where many of us spend a significant portion of our lives, the workplace. The professional environment is ripe for cognitive dissonance, particularly when there's a mismatch between a company's stated values and the daily reality employees experience. Dr. Robert Sutton from Stanford University has done extensive research on organizational behavior and leadership. In his book, The No Asshole Rule, Building a Civilized Workplace and Surviving One That Isn't, Sutton discussed how dissonance in the workplace often arises when there's a gap between what companies say they value and how they actually operate. This dissonance can lead to employee disengagement, lack of team trust, and ultimately impact overall productivity. For example, imagine a company that loudly proclaims its commitment to work-life balance, but in practice expects employees to answer emails at all hours, to work weekends, to take on the load of fired teammates. Employees might find themselves torn between their desire to be seen as a committed team player and their need for personal time. This internal conflict is a classic example of workplace cognitive dissonance. Dr. Amy Edmondson, a professor at Harvard Business School, has conducted influential research on psychological safety in the workplace. Her work shows that when employees feel safe to voice concerns and point out discrepancies between stated values and actual practice, it can lead to more honest organizational cultures and reduced cognitive dissonance. So, how can organizations address this issue? Dr. Adam Grant, an organizational psychologist at the Wharton School, suggests in his book Think Again that leaders should cultivate a culture of intellectual humility. This means being open to changing their minds when presented with new information, which can help align company practices more closely with stated values. For employees experiencing cognitive dissonance at work, it's important to find healthy ways to address it. Dr. Gretchen Spreitzer from the University of Michigan has studied how employees can craft their jobs to align more closely with their values and strengths. Her research shows that job crafting can reduce dissonance and increase job satisfaction. It's also worth noting that some degree of cognitive dissonance in the workplace can be positive. Dr. Charlene Nemeth from the University of California, Berkeley, has found that a certain level of dissent and disagreement can actually lead to better decision-making and innovation. Her work suggests that cognitive dissonance, when managed effectively, can be a catalyst for positive change in organizations. Imagine a tech company that prides itself on innovation and cutting-edge technology, but its internal systems are outdated and inefficient. Employees might experience cognitive dissonance as they try to reconcile the company's innovative image with their daily struggle with antiquated tools. This dissonance could lead to frustration and disengagement, or it could motivate employees to propose and drive internal improvements. Dr. Jennifer Chapman has studied how strong organizational cultures can sometimes exacerbate cognitive dissonance. Her research shows that when there's a significant mismatch between an employee's values and the organization's culture, it can lead to increased stress and high turnover. For leaders and managers, the key here is to create an environment where cognitive dissonance can be acknowledged and addressed openly. This might involve regular feedback sessions where employees can safely voice concerns about discrepancies they observe, or transparent communication about company challenges and limitations, or involving employees in problem solving when there's a gap between ideals and reality, and demonstrating a willingness to change practices that don't align with stated values. By fostering such an environment, organizations can turn potential sources of dissonance into opportunities for growth and improvement. And what about consumer behavior? The way we make purchasing decisions and our relationship with brands is often riddled with cognitive dissonance, and marketers have become adept at both creating and resolving this dissonance to influence our choices. Dr. Brian Young, a consumer psychologist, has conducted extensive research on how advertising can provoke cognitive dissonance. In his book, Psychology of Advertising, Young argues that much of advertising works by creating an idealized image of happiness or success linked to a product, thus creating a gap between consumers' current state and an advertised ideal. This gap can lead to dissonance, which consumers might try to resolve by purchasing the product. For example, consider luxury car advertisements. They often portray a lifestyle of sophistication and success that may be at odds with the viewer's current situation. This can create cognitive dissonance. I see myself as successful, but I don't have the trappings of success shown in this ad. The marketing trick here is to present the product as a way to resolve this dissonance. Dr. Robert Cialdini has identified several of these tricks that marketers use to exploit cognitive dissonance. In his seminal book Influence, The Psychology of Persuasion, Cialdini discusses how the principle of commitment and consistency can lead to post-purchase rationalization, a classic example of dissonance reduction. Here's how that works. After making a significant purchase, consumers often experience what's known as buyer's remorse, a form of cognitive dissonance arising from doubts about whether they made the right choice. To reduce this discomfort, they often seek out information that confirms their decision was a good one while downplaying or ignoring contradictory information. Dr. Baba Shiv from Stanford University has conducted fascinating research on decision-making in consumer contexts. In one study, Shiv and his colleagues found that when people make decisions quickly or under cognitive load, they're more likely to experience post-purchase dissonance. This suggests that marketers might deliberately create situations of cognitive overload to encourage impulsive purchases, knowing that consumers will likely rationalize their decisions afterward. But it's not all manipulation and regret. Cognitive dissonance in consumer behavior can also lead to positive outcomes. Dr. Americus Reed from the Wharton School has studied how brands can become part of consumers' identities. His research shows that when consumers strongly identify with a brand, they're more likely to act in ways that are consistent with that brand's values. This can lead to more ethical or sustainable consumer behavior if the brand emphasizes those values. For example, a person who identifies strongly with an environmentally conscious brand might experience dissonance if they engage in environmentally harmful behaviors. This dissonance can motivate them to make more eco-friendly choices in other areas of their life, extending beyond just their purchasing decisions. As consumers, being aware of cognitive dissonance can help us make more intentional choices. Here's some strategies. Be mindful of emotional responses to advertisements and consider whether they're creating artificial cognitive dissonance. Take time to make significant purchasing decisions, reducing the likelihood of impulsive buys driven by dissonance. Critically evaluate post-purchase rationalizations. Are you seeking out only confirming information about your purchase? And consider how brand identities align with your personal values, but be wary of using purchases as a substitute for substantive action. For businesses, understanding consumer cognitive dissonance offers valuable insights for ethical marketing strategies. By aligning their marketing messages more closely with consumers' authentic needs and values, companies can build brand loyalty based on genuine connections rather than manipulated dissonance. Dr. Jennifer Aker from Stanford University has done interesting work in this area. Her research on the psychology of time and money suggests that brands that help consumers spend their time in meaningful ways tend to create more lasting satisfaction than those focused solely on monetary value. This approach can lead to less post-purchase dissonance and stronger brand relationships. As we navigate the complex world of consumer choices, being aware of cognitive dissonance can empower us to make decisions that truly align with our values and needs, rather than simply reacting to cleverly crafted marketing messages. In our final segment, let's explore how cognitive dissonance plays a crucial role in education and learning processes. This is an area where the conflict between new information and existing beliefs can either hinder or catalyze intellectual growth. Dr. Carol Dweck, a psychologist at Stanford University, has done groundbreaking work on mindset and its impact on learning. In her book, Mindset, The New Psychology of Success, Dweck introduces the concept of fixed versus growth mindsets. People with a fixed mindset often experience significant cognitive dissonance when faced with challenging information that contradicts their self-perception as smart or capable. For instance, a student who believes they're just not good at math might experience dissonance when they succeed at difficult math problems. This dissonance can either lead to dismissing the success as a fluke, maintaining the fixed mindset, or reevaluating their beliefs about their mathematical abilities, shifting towards a growth mindset. Dr. David Kolb's experiential learning theory, detailed in his book Experiential Learning, Experience as the Source of Learning and Development, provides another perspective on cognitive dissonance in learning. Kolb argues that effective learning often requires resolving conflicts between different modes of adaptation to the world. This process inherently involves cognitive dissonance as learners grapple with new experiences that challenge their existing understanding. In higher education, cognitive dissonance can play a significant role in shaping students' worldviews. Dr. Marcia Baxter Magolda's research on self-authorship shows how college students navigate the dissonance between their pre-existing beliefs and the new ideas encountered in academia. This process of reconciling conflicting perspectives is necessary for developing critical thinking skills and a more nuanced understanding of complex issues. The impact of cognitive dissonance on learning isn't limited to formal education settings. In professional development and workplace learning, cognitive dissonance can be a powerful tool for growth. Dr. Amy Edmondson's work on creating psychologically safe environments is also applicable here, as it allows professionals to engage with dissonance-inducing information more productively. Her work suggests that when people feel safe to voice conflicting views and to admit mistakes, it leads to better team learning and to innovation. However, cognitive dissonance in learning contexts can also have negative effects. Dr. Lee Ross from Stanford University has studied the naive realism bias, where individuals believe they see the world objectively, while others are influenced by bias. This can lead to a form of cognitive dissonance where contradictory information is dismissed as biased or uninformed, rather than being engaged with critically. So how can educators and learners harness cognitive dissonance for positive outcomes? A few strategies include: embrace productive struggle. Frame challenges and contradictions as opportunities for growth rather than as threats to your self-esteem. Encourage metacognition. help learners reflect on their thought processes and recognize when they're experiencing cognitive dissonance. Create safe spaces for intellectual exploration. Foster environments where it's okay to change one's mind in light of new evidence. Use perspective-taking exercises. Encourage learners to consider viewpoints that contradict their own beliefs, promoting cognitive flexibility. Teach the science of learning. Help students understand how cognitive dissonance works in the learning process, normalizing their discomfort, the discomfort that often accompanies intellectual growth. Dr. Robert Bjork's work on desirable difficulties in learning suggests that introducing certain challenges, including those that induce cognitive dissonance, can enhance long-term learning and retention. This underscores the potential benefits of strategically incorporating cognitive dissonance into educational practices. For lifelong learners, being aware of cognitive dissonance can be a powerful tool for personal growth. Recognizing the discomfort that comes with challenging our existing beliefs allows us to push through that discomfort and expand our understanding. It's about cultivating intellectual humility, the recognition that our current knowledge and beliefs are not infallible and that there's always more to learn. As we navigate an increasingly complex and information-rich world, the ability to productively engage with cognitive dissonance in learning contexts becomes ever more critical. It's a skill that can lead to more robust critical thinking, greater empathy for diverse perspectives, and a lifelong passion for learning and growth. As we wrap up our exploration of cognitive dissonance, it's clear that this psychological phenomenon plays a vital role in shaping our behaviors, beliefs, and decisions across many aspects of life. From our personal relationships, health, and consumer choices to our political allegiances, education, and workplace behaviors, cognitive dissonance is a constant companion in our mental lives. Understanding cognitive dissonance isn't about eliminating it entirely. It's a natural part of how our minds work to maintain a coherent sense of self in a complex world. Instead, by recognizing when we're experiencing cognitive dissonance, we can make more intentional choices that align with our true values, be more open to changing our minds when presented with new information, develop greater empathy for others who may be grappling with their own internal conflicts, foster more honest and authentic relationships, both personal and professional, and engage more thoughtfully in political and social discourse. As we navigate an increasingly complex and interconnected world, the ability to recognize and constructively address cognitive dissonance becomes ever more important. It's a skill that can lead to personal growth, better decision-making, and more nuanced understanding of the world around us. I hope this episode has given you some food for thought and some tools to recognize cognitive dissonance in your own life. Remember, it's not about achieving perfect consistency in all our thoughts and actions. That's neither possible nor desirable. Instead, it's about cultivating awareness, embracing complexity, and striving for choices that truly reflect our values and aspirations. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of PsyberSpace. I'm your host, Leslie Poston, signing off. Until next time, keep questioning, keep learning, and as always, stay curious.